Greetings, Buttersock cultists. To give you guys the best experience possible, I make sure to use some of the most sophisticated recording equipment around. But what I can't make sure of is that you guys are using similarly high-quality audio equipment to listen to those stories. I think the least I can do is help you guys out with that, which is why today's video is sponsored by Raycon Everyday Earbuds. Raycon's newest model of earbuds are designed for comfort and longevity, with a 32-hour battery life and optimized gel tips that fit perfectly in your ears. I've been told that they're so well designed that they simply will not fall out, even during the most intense workouts. And don't worry about getting caught out in the rain while wearing them, as their newest model are now almost completely water resistant. Raycons also boast 3 highly specialized sound profiles for whether you're chilling with lo-fi beats, rocking out with heavier rhythms, or relaxing with soporific podcasts like mine. They also include both noise isolation and awareness modes, so with just a touch of a button, you can effortlessly switch between the two. With a whopping 49,000 5-star reviews, Raycon prides themselves on providing customer satisfaction and value for your money, because their earbuds are almost half the price of competing brands. And with a 15% off code that they've so generously granted us, they'll be even more affordable to the loyal members of the Buttersock cult. All you gotta do is head over to buyraycon.com/LetsReadYT and get the audio quality that you deserve for even less than the market price. A little over a year ago, I had a terrible breakup with a girl I hoped to be marrying. Turns out she found a more interesting guy and dumped me like a smelly diaper. The breakup took me by surprise, and I had a very hard time accepting it. I can't count the number of texts I sent her begging to take me back. I went through the usual routine of listening to sad music and crying like a teenage girl. When I got tired of that, I moved on to anger and so forth. 8 months went by, and one day, I realized that I couldn't recall the last time I'd thought about her. I assumed that I was done grieving, and that meant only one thing. It was time to return to the dating market. To my shock, it didn't take long. I'd only been looking for only a few days when I noticed this cute girl at Starbucks. She was sitting alone, and I asked to join her. Things went from there. When I left, I had an upcoming dinner date and a massive boost of confidence. Unfortunately, that girl would cancel on me at the last second. I realized that I may be pushing things too hard and decided to let it happen naturally, and I focused on my work instead. Maybe a month later, a girl I worked with asked me out and I agreed. She was cute, around my age, and highly intelligent, all things which made her too good for me, but I accepted anyway. This date would bloom into an actual relationship. Once we started spending the weekends at one another's apartments, I started to believe that we may have a future together. I could finally change my status to in a relationship on Facebook. But little did I know, this seemingly minor little detail would open a gigantic box of trouble that lasts to this very day. Not long after I updated my page, I got a message I never expected to see. It was my ex. I had to read it several times just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. This made no sense. The two of us had dated over 2 years when she had told me that she'd fallen in love with another guy. I thought our relationship was solid, but I came to find out that she'd had one foot out the door for a while. I just heard she was planning on marrying the guy she dumped me for, but now, here she is, asking me to take her back. The situation left me in a bit of a moral quandary. The answer should have been simple, but her message had unearthed some feelings that I had thought were dead and buried forever. A part of me wanted to do it, but after an honest evaluation of my situation as it pertained to love and the like, I knew I couldn't. Another person's feelings were at stake, and she'd done nothing to deserve this type of treatment. I gave the ex a firm no, and left it at that. I assumed that she'd moved on to another man and I'd be free to live as I would. That may have been the stupidest assumption I'd ever made. Less than a week later, a second message arrived. This was not kind and loving like the first. She was mad. The very idea that I wouldn't take her back must have never entered her mind. And this is when I made the connection between the relationship update and her offer to get back together. This made no so much easier to say. I have no idea what occurred between her and her fiancé, and I don't care. I was convinced that had I not posted that I had a new girlfriend, she would have never have contacted me. That type of vindictiveness disgusts me and leaves me relieved I got away from her when I did. I acted as if though I never received her message. Attention was obviously what she was after, and I wasn't going to give it to her. I probably shouldn't have answered the first one in retrospect. I was still hoping that she'd eventually move on, but when I noticed the key scratches down both sides of my car, I was done playing games. I immediately called the cops and filed a report. There was nothing they could do without proof, which I knew. I simply wanted to establish a pattern if the harassment continued. I didn't have long to wait. My girlfriend, who I'll call Bobby, had a rock thrown through her windshield. Another report was made. I was afraid that this would be the point at which Bobby would nope out, but she stuck by me to this day. What had happened so far would prove to be nothing compared to her most recent tantrum. Friday of last week, Bobby and I were playing a game online when a loud pounding came from the front door. I ran to answer it. What met me there was a group of around 10 or 15 heavily armed police officers. It appeared that I had been swatted. To their credit, they were calm and asked for permission to search the apartment. I said yes, and the officer in charge informed me that they had received a call stating that I had Bobby at gunpoint and intended to kill her and myself. That would be hard since I don't even own a gun. The officers finished their search quickly, and I told them who I believed had made the call. They took down all the information and went on their way. To date, I haven't heard anything about the investigation. If they can prove that she was behind the call, she's getting a legal beatdown. A lot of young people think it's no big deal. I assure you, getting 10 assault rifles pointed in your face is not funny. People have died because of swatting, and knowing how close I was to dying makes me violently ill. For real. And until we get any news from the cops, I can't tell you all anything else. I hope she gets punished and never bothers me again. And I'll post any important changes to the case if or when there are any. Until that time, pray for me. Wish me luck or whatever you do. Something tells me I might need it. I'm posting this first-hand account here from my younger sister who is currently serving a sentence for manslaughter in our state prison. She mailed this to me with the purpose of sharing it on social media. Her hopes are that it may discourage other women who are in her position to make the same mistake she did, and I'll let her speak from here. Most of my life has been spent in a pursuit of self-destruction. From the time that I was 13 until just a few years ago, I drank daily and slept with any man who took my fancy. I lost my self-esteem and respect at a young age. After something awful occurred to me at 13, I no longer care if I lived or died. I began drinking and smoking soon after. It did little to suppress the pain, but it did something. My experience with boys started around this time too. I quickly gained a reputation around town and used it to get things I wanted. Naturally, my behavior wasn't helping in school, and at 17 I dropped out completely. Although I did manage to get my GED a few years later, and that was only because I was unable to find a job without it. This lifestyle carried on throughout the remainder of my teens and 20s. It was an empty existence. I lived alone sometimes while shacking up with a long string of nobodies other times. Somewhere around my 30th birthday, I found myself married. I can't recall who tricked who into doing it, and I don't suppose it matters now. We were both regulars at the same bar, and after one very long night of drinking, we decided to get hitched. Nothing really changed at first. When we weren't working, we were drinking. The first sign of problems came around a year into the marriage. I discovered that I was pregnant and knew that I would have to stop drinking. It was a hard time for me, and my new husband was less than pleased to lose his drinking buddy. When our daughter arrived early and underweight, I was distraught and drowned myself in booze as always. I realized now my body was so damaged from the years of drinking it couldn't supply her with what she needed to grow. I wish that I could say that I was a great mother, but all of it overwhelmed me. Had I not come from a loving family that was willing to watch her when I asked them, things may not have gone in her favor. I remained in that state for almost another year until gradually pulling myself out of it. This lifestyle had played a large part in my girl's health problems, and I didn't want it to happen again. This change came just in time. Soon, I became pregnant again. This time around, I ate far better and did everything the doctor suggested. As before, Mike, my husband, was not happy. His mean comments about his kids got even worse. I was beginning to consider leaving him. When our second daughter arrived, Mike expected that I would return to the bottle, but I didn't. Our new daughter was healthy and strong, and this made Mike hate them even more. Things came to a head when he came home drunk late one night and woke up the baby. I asked him to be quiet, but this made things worse. I thought that he was going to hit me at one point. I knew then that it was time for me to leave. I waited until I was safely lodged with my parents before I called and told him we were finished. He was very angry and blamed the girls for the collapse of the marriage. I tried my best to start a new life. Mike didn't make it easier either. He was constantly calling and begging for me to come back, and more than once, he showed up at my parents' house. One night, I made the mistake of going outside to talk to him, and he took this opportunity to attempt to abduct me. He had me in the car, but I was able to escape before he could drive away. I called the police, and he was arrested. A restraining order was placed on him, and he was released on bail. By now, I was terrified not just for my own safety, but for that of my parents and my daughters. Mike had threatened them all. This is when I went out and purchased a handgun. I'd never fired a pistol before, but my father was a Marine vet. He taught me every nook and cranny of gun ownership. I became a good shot. I maintain to this day that buying the gun was not a mistake. It would be what I chose to do with it that was wrong. A few weeks went by before I noticed Mike driving past the house. It tended to be late at night, usually after the bars closed. I became convinced that he was going to break in and kidnap or kill me and my family, and I wasn't going to let that happen. It wasn't long before I caught sight of him again. This night, he was parked across the street. I went to the gun safe and retrieved my 9mm. I swiftly walked across to his car and raised the pistol. His last words were, "You wouldn't dare." I fired 3 times into his chest and head. He was dead. One big problem was solved, but a new, even larger problem waited just around the corner. I was arrested that night and spent a few weeks in jail until I got out on bail. Not many people could call what I did a clear case of self-defense. I had not planned it, but I knew I was not under an immediate threat. I'll refrain from dragging things out from here. Due to the efforts of my lawyers and Mike's extensive record in and out of the marriage, I was convicted of manslaughter instead of murder and sentenced to 7 years. As it stands now, I've served almost 4 of it and will probably be released on parole early in 2024. I'm sorry for what I did that night, but it's a bit more complicated than you may think. I'm happy Mike is dead, but I realize what I did was selfish and short-sighted. Not only do my girls have to grow up knowing their father died at their mother's hand, but they must go at least 5 years without a parent. Fortunately, my parents were granted custody while I'm incarcerated, but I don't believe anything can replace a real parent, or better, both parents in a child's life. This brings us to my true purpose of writing this. I'm well aware that there are a lot of other women trapped in the same or similar situations to what I was. You've all, without a doubt, thought about doing what I did. While I would never tell you not to defend yourself, please don't do what I did. Cold-blooded murder is just that. If you don't care about what happens to you, please think about everyone else who will suffer. Just because it seems like the only option at the time, I assure you there are other choices. Mike may have been an evil person, but the day I took the law into my own hands, it ceased to be just about the 2 of us. My rash action altered the course of many people's lives for years to come. Don't make the same mistake. There is always another way. It was like something out of a movie. When they told me what was planned for me, I was beyond shocked. It's not like you get told your ex-husband wants you dead every day. When I say wanted me dead, I don't mean he made some idle threat during an argument. According to the police, he sought out an old friend and offered to pay him to kill me. I must have had a guardian angel looking out for me. The friend he had approached just so happened to be a confidential informant for a narcotics officer. He used the information as a way to lessen his upcoming sentencing. I don't care why he did it. I'm just glad he did. A lot of people in his line of work could have simply said no and went on their way. I'm sure a lot of you have some questions. I'm going to lay out a sort of bit of background, and then from there I'll go on to the actual contacting and subsequent operation to arrest my ex, including his sentencing and aftermath. There's a lot to cover, but I'll try to keep it brief. For the most part, our marriage wasn't anything abnormal. I met him after he'd left the army. At that time, he worked at an engineering firm. I was attracted to his confidence and overall good looks. There were small red flags from the start. There always are, but like all young girls, I ignored them. We got married almost a year to the day we met, and our son arrived the next year. Adam, my ex-husband, wasn't abusive, but he had a terrible temper. Our arguments were anything but civil. I didn't mind at first, but I quickly realized it wasn't the proper environment to raise a child. I attempted to get him into couples counseling, but he refused. He said it was normal for couples to fight, and I agree, but the way he acted was way beyond healthy. I hung in there as long as I could, but after 3.5 years, I filed for divorce. Then, the next phase began. Adam wanted total custody of our son, not because he thought it was best for our child, but because he knew I wouldn't allow it. This led to a long and drug-out court battle. A process that could have been handled with a handshake languished in court for years. I never intended to keep him from seeing his son. However, Adam worked long hours. There was no way I wanted our son spending all his time on childcare. With no strikes against me, it was obvious that I would be awarded primary custody in the end. This is most likely what drove Adam to do what he did. I came into the story after the process had been set in motion. According to authorities, Adam had contacted an old buddy from the Rangers. The guy had been kicked out of the army for drug trafficking. In Adam's mind, this made the guy a cold-blooded murderer. The man went straight to his police handler with the information. The detective went to his superiors and they put together a plan to get Adam on tape. It took a week or so, but the day came and Adam and his buddy met to discuss specifics. Judging from the recording, Adam had no clue that had been set up. An agreement was reached and the men went their separate ways. Adam was arrested less than a mile from the meeting spot. Because of the seriousness of the charges, Adam was denied bail. The police weren't sure if I was out of danger. Adam wasn't talking. An around-the-clock detail stayed on our house for a few weeks, but no threat appeared and it was pulled. Our son was now at the age where he was beginning to understand what was going on around him. I didn't want him to have to suffer through a trial. I even visited Adam at the jail to beg him to take a plea and save his child the heartbreak. He wasn't very receptive. Neither did he deny the allegations. I went away frustrated and dreading the future. To my surprise, he would accept a plea of 15 years a few months later. I'm not sure my request was the cause. Knowing Adam, he probably knew that he was screwed if he went to trial. The process wrapped up in July of 2021 and he is presently serving time somewhere in state prison. Where he is, I have no idea. Considering what he did, I have no intent on letting him see his son. All he had to do was swallow his pride and he would possibly be with him right this moment. This seems to be a big problem in divorces these days. Couples get too wrapped up in sticking it to their former partner. I know emotions run high in such cases, but your kids should come first. The end of a marriage is already very traumatic for a child. Don't allow your feelings toward your ex to cloud your judgment. Your children should always be your one and only consideration. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. I was aware of Joe as far back as high school. He was a friend of my older brother then, but he and I never had an occasion to speak to one another. I was already 25 when he and I became friends, and that's all it was at first. We were just two people among a group of friends hanging out. I thought he was cute, but I had no idea what he thought about me. The longer he and I spent together, the more intimate our relationship became. Finally, we found ourselves alone in his place, and nature took its course. We were like an old couple. He drove my car and pumped the gas. After a year together, he was using my car to drive back and forth to work. Looking back, it was a very traditional relationship, kind of akin to a marriage, but there was a big catch. Joe had made it clear that he saw no point in marriage. I told him I wanted to be married by 35. I hoped that he changed his mind before then. We had time, so I didn't dwell on it. When you're young, you think you have all the time in the world. We now moved forward 5 years. Joe and I had lived together in 2 different cities. He was making good money and I was playing the role of the dutiful housewife without the ring. I was spending a lot of time in the evenings talking to people in our area. I began to make friends and go out without Joe. He didn't like it, but I didn't care. The relationship was barely hanging on by this point. We were essentially living 2 separate lives. The time finally came to end things, and Joe was actually very cool about it. The choice was made for me to keep the apartment and our cat, Ivory. Joe got a smaller place closer to his job. His last day at the apartment, he left the keys, gave me a hug, and wished me good luck. It was far more civilized than any of my other breakups. I was eager to start a new phase of my life, but without Joe's income, I had to work, and a lot. I usually didn't return home until way after dark. There were a few occasions when I'd find things in a different place than I remembered leaving them. I figured that I was just exhausted and let it go. When I wasn't working, I'd go out with friends or on the odd date from time to time. A strange thing began to happen during this time. On more than a few weekend nights, Joe would just so happen to be at the same place as me. This was weird because Joe had always been a big homebody. He'd go out on special occasions like when his favorite band was playing, but that was rare. I brought it up to him on one meeting and he said that he got bored sitting at home alone. It made sense and I accepted it, despite knowing that he wasn't the kind who got bored very easily. I guess I became used to this after a while. We'd wave at one another across the room and go back to what we were doing. We'd been apart about 6 months before I began dating anyone seriously. Like Joe and I, the next guy I chose was part of my friend group. Eric was an IT professional and the exact opposite of Joe. He liked going out and having a good time. We are a lot more suited to each other, and it wasn't long before marriage came up. Eric proposed. I said yes, and we set a date. I had the bigger apartment, so Eric moved in with me. All this time, Joe was still popping up here and there. More than once, Eric and I were on a date when it happened. Eric thought it was strange, but I assured him that it was just a coincidence. He remained skeptical. Some of his things were becoming misplaced, just like mine had. A framed picture of us that sat on the nightstand mysteriously fell and broke, and I was beginning to think something may be wrong. Still, I couldn't think of an explanation. Eric would be the one to expose the truth, though. Everything blew up when we ran into Joe at the movies. Eric got mad and accused Joe of stalking us. Joe laughed, and I thought Eric had lost his mind from jealousy, and we left right away. Eric was silent the whole way home. I kept my mouth shut. When he did finally talk, every word made sense. The next morning, he got up early and went down to my car. The previous evening, he sat me down and asked me a bunch of questions. He wrote down my answers and looked over them for a few minutes. When he was done, he unveiled his theory. When Joe moved out, I hadn't bothered to get the locks changed. I didn't see a reason why. Over time, I'd forgotten about it, and this told Eric that Joe had a copy of the key and was entering the apartment when no one was home. I didn't want to admit it, but it all made sense. This explained why things were being moved. But how did he always know where I was? This would be answered in the morning. I awoke soon after Eric and made coffee. I brought a cup down to him while he was digging through the car. I sat nearby and watched as he meticulously picked through every nook and cranny. He'd been doing this for about half an hour when I heard, "Bingo." He crawled from the back seat and ran up to me with a closed hand. He opened it and showed me this little white disc about the size of a nickel. I asked what it was. He explained that it was a cheap version of an Apple AirTag. I had no clue what that was. We returned upstairs and he brought up a page about them. As I read, things began to make more sense, and this was how Joe always knew where I'd be. More than likely, soon after the breakup, Joe gained access to my car. If he had a copy of our apartment key, he probably kept one for my car. And this is when he planted the AirTag. With that, he could always know where I was. He didn't even have to follow me around. I assumed that he was keeping an eye on me, maybe to make sure that I didn't meet anyone new. Maybe he was hoping that I'd ask him back home for old time's sake. I can't begin to decipher what crazy things were going through his crazy mind. And as you can probably guess, I was terrified and angry, both in equal measures. Eric insisted that I call the cops, but I was reluctant. I didn't want to get Joe in trouble. I guess I wasn't as angry as I had first thought. Maybe it was some remaining feelings stirring around. And I thought about it for another hour or two and decided to let Joe know that I was aware of what he'd been doing. The Joe I knew was terrified of going to jail. I bet if I threatened him, he'd back off. Later that day, I sent him a text including a picture of the tag. Basically, I swore that I would turn it over to the authorities if I ever saw him again. The next morning, a simple text message saying, "I'm sorry, you'll never hear from me again," popped up on my phone. More than a year has passed and Joe has disappeared from my life. He even deleted his Facebook page that same day he sent the apology. I don't imagine he'll ever try anything like that again. With another person, this would be a scary situation, but Joe's not a violent guy. I'm guessing he got lonely and was trying to create an opportunity where we'd run into one another. Maybe things would be like the way that they used to be, or some other convoluted BS. My instincts tell me that I did the right thing. Eric remains anything but pleased by my decision, and that's his right and I don't blame him. I'd be suspicious if he wasn't protective of me, and so far, things appear to be on a new path. Despite our disagreement, Eric and I are now married and hoping for good news any day. I'm eager to start that family I've always wanted, and it's nice to finally be with a man that wants the same thing. I met Erin when I was a sophomore in college. She was very well known around town for her beauty, and I think that went to her head and caused her to take advantage of those around her later in life. When I met her, though, she was still just a pretty 19-year-old girl who liked to have a good time. I wasn't aware of her popularity then. Had I been, I probably would have been too scared to approach her. We seemed to connect right off the bat, and I quickly convinced myself that we were meant to spend the rest of our lives together. I didn't say anything then. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by smothering her. We'd been dating over a year when the subject of marriage finally came up. Erin was the one who brought it up, exactly a week after I purchased a ring and proposed to her. She said yes. There was no hesitation or reluctance. In no way did she indicate that she wasn't ready, and planning began immediately. The date was set for the week after I graduated. I left most of the arrangements in the hands of Erin and her folks. They weren't wealthy, so I didn't expect anything lavish, which was fine with me. The next year flew by, and before I knew it, the wedding was less than a month away. Even after that long, there was still no signs of the impending disaster. I checked in to ensure everything was going okay and got "everything's going great" in reply. I refocused on my upcoming graduation and expected the following week to be the happiest of my life. Then, I found the note. I had been at school dealing with some last-minute paperwork. I'd left Erin in bed sleeping, but expected her to be up when I got back. I called out to her, but got no answer. I checked her bed, but she wasn't there. I searched all through the house. She was nowhere to be found, and I thought that maybe something had come up. In that case, we would usually leave notes for one another on the dinner table. And sure enough, when I checked, I found a piece of paper folded up with my name on it, and what I read almost killed me. It said, and I quote, "I'm sorry. I still love you, but I can't go on with the wedding. I realized I have no idea who I am. Until I find out, I can't commit to anyone. I'm going away for a while and I'm not sure when I'll be back, if ever. Please don't come looking for me. I need time to find myself alone. Tell my parents I'm sorry about all the money they spent on the ceremony, and I hope someday to be in a position to pay them back. Please know this has nothing to do with you. You are a great guy. Go find a new girl and start that family you've talked about. Forget about me. It's for the best. Love always. Aaron." I called her phone, but there was no answer. It had to be a joke. Nothing else made sense. Aaron wasn't known for being impulsive. Her parents were as surprised as I was, and they came over later that day and I showed them the note. We called all of her friends, but no one had heard from her. Although she was an adult, we contacted law enforcement. At the least, it would be a relief to know that she hadn't been forced to leave against her will. The next morning, an officer from the local police called. Aaron had been found and she was okay. Unfortunately, that was all he could tell me. It looked as if though she really had run away, and this was a major shock to everyone, but we were helpless to do anything. If it is what she wanted, we would have to wait and hope she came to her senses. A few people accused me of pressuring her into marriage, but that got put to bed quickly. For now, we had no choice but to move on without her. I held on to the hope that she may return within a month or two. I stayed in town and worked 2 jobs. Telling myself that she'd be back made things a bit less traumatic. Work became the sole focus of my life. Before I knew it, another year had passed. Erin was still nowhere to be seen. She had contacted her parents soon after leaving, but they couldn't convince her to return. I'd had a few girls ask me out in that time, but I was still in shock. Any hope that I had of seeing her again was almost gone. Then she suddenly reappeared, but she wasn't alone. After working weeks of double shifts, I arrived back home exhausted. As I turned onto my street, I caught sight of Erin's car parked in the driveway. I wasn't sure it was real. I rubbed my eyes repeatedly, but each time the car remained. A renewed energy coursed through my body. I don't remember anything but running full speed into the house, screaming Erin's name as I went. She sat up from her chair as I entered. Her beautiful smile lit up the dark room. The joy I felt in that moment is indescribable, but the joy was just beginning. Next to her on the couch was a beautiful little blonde girl, a spitting image of Erin. I took Erin in my arms and embraced her, scared to let her go. And I looked down onto this little child. Erin was clearly her mother, yet for a brief moment, I was confused. Who was the child's father? And I didn't dare hope. There was no way I could be this fortunate, and I sheepishly looked up at her and began to ask. I couldn't finish my thought, and I choked on my words and the tears filled my eyes, and I could just point. Yes, she's yours. No words had ever been so beautiful in my ears. I squeezed Erin tighter than ever, and I feared that if I let her go, it would all disappear in a flash and I'd be left alone in that room. Any anger I may have held evaporated the second I saw her. Her apologies mattered not at all, and having my love back erased any pain that I'd felt during her absence. While I held my amazing and wonderful daughter, Erin talked about what she had been doing all that time. To be honest, I didn't hear most of it. I was so happy, and little mattered but the 3 of us in that moment. Even though I didn't bring it up at the time, I was wondering if her return meant that she wanted to get married after all. I decided to keep this to myself for the time being. We'd have plenty of time to discuss it later. For the moment, I made sure my home was comfortable for my ladies. Erin's parents went nuts, buying anything baby-related they could think of. All I had to do was keep bringing in the money. Every second I was away seemed like torture, but I had a family now. I was willing to do anything to provide for them. A few weeks went by and life appeared perfect. Erin turned out to be a great homemaker. She'd make breakfast for me every morning and have dinner ready in the evening when I came home. It was just as we had envisioned, and I should have known that it couldn't last. A month later, I arrived home from work as usual. When I entered the living room, I saw a man sitting on my chair. I didn't know him, yet something was familiar about his face. Erin introduced him as Mike. She couldn't look me in the eyes, nor kiss me on the cheek as she usually did when I came home, and something was clearly amiss. I shook Mike's hand and asked why he was there, and neither of them could answer. This made me nervous, and I raised my voice. I asked a second time. Mike's jaw clenched. Erin stood up and began to tell me how she had actually spent the past 16 months. When she first fled town, she had plans to stay with a friend in Florida. This arrangement only lasted a short time because that friend was now living with a meth dealer and they were both addicts. The boyfriend was very paranoid and didn't trust her, going as far as accusing her of being an informant. She left that situation after a few weeks and lived in a motel. She began looking for work but couldn't find anything. A month had gone by this point, and she claimed a mixture of regret and inability to support herself drove her to return home. She began the drive back and made it as far as Louisiana. Somehow, I'm not sure how, she befriended a girl at a gas station who got her a job working with her. Things now having improved, she decided to settle down there. I'm not going to include the name of the city for personal reasons. And while working nights at the gas station, she met Mike, and they fell in love, and she would eventually move in with him. Soon after, she discovered that she was pregnant. They discussed matters and decided to get married. His family began making plans for the wedding. This time, though, she went through with it. Not long after, their daughter was born. According to her, Mike never questioned his paternity of the girl. It was just a given. Their life was average. Both parents worked while Mike's mother happily babysat the girl during the day. The only problem was that Erin missed her family and wanted to return. In her warped mind, she figured that she'd just do what she'd done to me and take off with no explanation other than a short note. She waited for Mike to leave one morning, loaded herself and their child into her car, and disappeared. You know the rest. You probably can guess my reaction upon hearing this. I wanted to scream, but our daughter was sleeping in the next room. Anytime I'd raise my voice just a small amount, Mike would ball up his fists like he wanted to fight. You'd think he'd be just as mad as I was. I finally asked him what his problem was. I had no intention of fighting over her. He proceeded to tell me how he was aware of how I used to abuse Erin physically and how he wasn't going to allow it. Even after everything, I was shocked. I couldn't speak. I looked over at Erin. She was hanging her head like a child after being caught by a parent doing something wrong. I was finally able to form a thought and asked if she was going to tell him the truth. She was silent, so I told him myself. He could ask anyone who ever knew either of us. Not one of them would accuse me of raising my hand to her, not even once. I think he could tell by her behavior that she'd lied to him, and then it all became clear. I now knew why he looked so familiar. I'd been staring into his face every day for a month. I'd been so happy Erin was home that I'd tricked myself into believing that poor little girl was mine. Mike had been conned just like me. I didn't hold him responsible, and rather than allow things to get out of hand, I asked him what he wanted to do. I wanted nothing to do with Erin now, and I made that clear. Mike must have still been a little enamored with her because he was eager to bring Erin and their child back to Louisiana with him. I didn't give her any choice in the matter. Truthfully, in that moment, I didn't care if she died in a ditch. I just wanted her gone. She knew her options were limited, so she agreed to go back with Mike. They quickly got all they could together and left. I took one last look at that beautiful child and wished Mike good luck. That was 2002. A lot has changed in my life for sure. I moved to Portland and fell in love with my now wife. We built a great family together, raising 2 wonderful boys and fostering abandoned animals. I wouldn't change a thing about the life I've made. I do worry about Erin and Mike's daughter even now, though. and for that little child's sake, I hope Mike raised her free from her mother's influence. It would be the worst of crimes if Erin were able to ruin a third life, the life of her own child. I'm fully aware of how crazy what I'm about to tell you sounds, but at the time it seemed like the only way to solve the problem. Anyone who has been in a similar situation probably understands where I'm coming from, and maybe back before social media you could make yourself disappear, but these days there's just too many eyes on you. If you overlook one small thing, your plan is ruined. It was an aunt that uncovered my ruse. In her defense, she didn't do it on purpose. She'd been living in another country for so long, I think we just forgot about her. Therefore, if you ever try what we tried, be sure to cover every possible angle. I suppose I've led you guys on long enough. The mysterious plan I've been speaking of was the faking of my own death. I didn't undergo this for the usual reasons most do. I wasn't wanted. I didn't embezzle a bunch of money from my job. There was no simple reason. I had a crazy ex-girlfriend that had been making my life and my family's life hell for almost 3 years. My story will be different from most guys. I know what I was getting into. Connie was always an intense girl. She never did things halfway. If she drank, she didn't stop until she passed out. Her diet was always planned out to the smallest calorie. This was the trait I liked about her most. Life was never boring while she was around. I never felt more alive than when I was with her. This personality had its downsides too, but I wouldn't experience those until much later. The initial 6 to 9 months were great, but then her mother died. Connie appeared to be on bad terms with her mom when she was alive. You would expect her to be a little sad, but nothing overboard, and it turned out to be the exact opposite. From the moment she received the news, she became inconsolable and stayed that way for over a year. I assumed that she felt guilty about the way that she had left things, and this was the only reason for her extreme mourning. I've discovered since then her thinking has no real logical stream of thought. It's just all emotion for her. And during this period of time, I tried my hardest to play the role of the supportive boyfriend, but I was treated like an annoyance more than a partner. One day, I finally had enough and walked out. I don't think she even noticed. I'd already moved on with my life and hooked up with a few girls before I heard from her. She was not happy. I was accused of all sorts of terrible things, none of them true, of course, and it sounded like she just needed to get her frustration out on me and she'd moved on. I hung up and put the call behind me. It looked as if though this was going to happen. She remained silent for a long time. Life was going well until I got a text from my mom with a link. I clicked the link and it led to a page address. OP is a serial abuser. Of course, OP was replaced with my full name. The page was one long testimonial written by Connie herself, outlining all of the horrible and unspeakable things I supposedly did to her and other girls. I was so furious, I called her immediately. The minute I heard the tone in her voice, I knew I'd screwed up. She said that she would pull the page down if I came back to her, and this made me even madder, and I hung up. And it turns out, she had been recording the whole call, and she edited it to make herself look good and posted it on the page. I had to get a lawyer involved. He contacted her and notified her to take down the page or she would be sued. We heard nothing for some time, and it was looking like we were going to have to go forward with the suit, but she yanked the page down at the last second. I still have no idea how many people saw that crap, but she did have a link to it on her Facebook page for almost 6 months. It should have stopped there, but Connie was only getting started. Like I said, she never does anything halfway. Her next attack was on my parents' business. She proceeded to give them bad reviews on every rating page she could find, and we were helpless to do anything. A few of the sites were sympathetic, but they refused to remove them. Business eventually bounced back, but a lot of damage was done in the meantime. The bad reviews thing was just something to keep her busy while she waited for her real targets to pop up. Despite asking the girls I dated not to post any pictures of me on their social media pages, a few didn't listen. They became collateral damage in Connie's war against me. She must have had some major program thing going on, because the second a friend or a new love interest posted a picture of me, Connie pounced. The attack was always the same. She would start by calling the girl all types of slurs. If this didn't work, she'd tell the victim lies about how bad of a person I was. In the end, the girl would always cut ties with me and delete any pictures she'd posted. Connie wasn't showing any signs of letting up. It had been over 2 years and she was still coming up with new ideas every week. My family decided that we had to take extreme action. If I was no longer around, perhaps she'd stop her vendetta. The plan was set in motion, and everyone we knew was brought into it. It would only work if everyone did their part. Finally, the day came. My mother posted an announcement on her Facebook that I had died in a car crash the day prior. I stayed out of sight and spoke only to those involved in the scheme. It wasn't long before Connie made her appearance. She expressed her sadness to my mom and then went silent. It looked as if though she had bought it. All the bad reviews began to disappear, and all her awful posts she'd made about me around social media did too. It all seemed to be going well. Months passed, and I began to think that I may be able to live a new, but normal life soon. Everyone continued living as if though I was dead. 9 months passed, and the plan had worked to perfection. Connie was nowhere to be seen. My Aunt Sue had returned to Thailand more than 10 years ago. No one in the family had spoken to her since, and she had never been computer literate. Out of nowhere, she pops up on Facebook. When she saw the announcement, she went crazy. She had no sense of duplicity. Combine that with her total lack of computer knowledge, and all we had built was soon destroyed. My mother tried to bring her in on the plan, but rather than answer through the messenger, she posted everything out in the open for everyone to see. The whole story wasn't there, but someone as cunning as Connie could figure it out in no time. She began asking questions, which led to more lies. Ultimately, without an actual death certificate, we were forced to admit defeat. Even then, I don't think Aunt Sue understood what she'd done, and I don't hold any grudges against her. It was a crazy idea to begin with. Now that the scam was out in the open, Connie renewed her libelous assault on the family. She probably had 100 or more fake accounts dedicated to bullying us, and every time that I'd get one taken down, 2 more would pop up. It became a full-time job just doing that. I was beginning to crack, but something strange had happened. One day there were no more fake accounts, and I assumed that this was a new tactic embraced for impact. For some reason, she began losing interest in me. Don't get me wrong, I was happy to see it, but after dealing with years of this, I was very suspicious. It took a few months to figure out what was going on. Pictures of a new man began showing up on her social media. When the post announcing her engagement was put up, I reserved my joy. I was so distrustful of her, I paid a mutual friend of ours to attend the wedding just to be sure. I still keep the text on my phone 4 years later. It's real, all right. I can confirm that they were married at 2:32 p.m. today. God is truly great. Along with the text, a photo of the happy couple kissing at the altar was included. I can promise you that day is a far more joyous one in our home than theirs. I showed it to my parents right after reading it. It's the only time in my life I've seen my dad cry. The nightmare was finally over. Even then, I hesitated to let my guard down completely. I continued to monitor Connie's posts and search for fake accounts on a regular basis. After 6 months, I finally relaxed. Last time I checked, the couple was expecting their first child. I can honestly say I wish them all the luck in the world. May their marriage be a long and fruitful one. And I'm not joking either. I carry one great fear with me to this day. Their marriage fails and I become the focus of her anger once again. Now that I have my own family, the pressure may be too great, and I may do something I regret. For the sake of all those we love, I encourage her to focus on the present and enjoy the second chance God has given everyone. The girl I would come to lose myself over is named Angel. It's a fitting name for her. And when I met Angel, I was an unemployed and aimless 22-year-old. My days were spent online playing games and chatting with strangers. On one of these lazy days, I stepped out to 7-Eleven for a drink and some snacks. Working the checkout was a new girl. She struck up a conversation. Before long, she'd invited me over to her house. I was confused. I'm not a good-looking guy, and this affects my self-esteem. I would eventually come to the conclusion that she was making fun of me. I never expected her to call, and was shocked when she did. It was getting late. This made me think that I may be robbed or assaulted when I arrived, but I went anyway. The house was in a nice middle-class neighborhood not far from mine. It was your average ranch style and in great shape. Even then, I braced for the strike that I expected when the door opened. Instead, Angel greeted me, invited me in, and introduced me to her family one by one. Everybody was very nice and welcoming. I thought that I'd stepped into an alternate reality. The family was about to sit down to dinner, and I was asked to join them. I hadn't had a real family dinner since I was very young, and I happily agreed. It really blew my mind when they joined hands to pray. This was something that I thought only happened in movies. I wasn't sure what to do and just followed their lead. Things were more normal from there. Angel's dad asked me some basic questions about myself. I tried to answer them as nicely as I could, and the rest of the dinner went in very much the same manner. One of the family would talk about their day while the others listened intently. It was all very, 1950s Leave It to Beaver style, and I kind of liked it. After dinner, Angel and I sat in the living room and got to know one another better. Nothing physical occurred, and I found myself interested in what she had to say. Her kind of girl was really rare these days, I found. I wanted to know what made her click, and just before 10 p.m., Angel's parents hinted that it was time to leave. There was still so much to learn, but I figured I had time. I was determined not to screw this up, so I thanked them for the nice dinner and drove home with a song in my heart and butterflies in my stomach, as cringy as that might sound. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was falling in love. Our next 6 months together was paradise. I became a part of the family in all but name. Everything was going well except for one small thing. Intimacy was a no-go. We would mess around, but when it came to actually committing to the act, she would shut me down. Neither of us had much experience, but it was clear that she had almost zero. It was an extremely frustrating situation. I did my best to be understanding, and after trying anything and everything I could to convince her, I was at a boiling point. The next time I was shut down, I kinda blew, and I don't mean in the way you think. This was serious. My frustration boiled over into a full-blown screaming episode. Even as it was happening, I wanted it to stop, but I just couldn't hold back any longer. Angel was, of course, a crying mess, and I couldn't think of anything else but to run out of the house and just get away. I tried to call and apologize as soon as I got home, but she wouldn't come to the phone. I'm not sure if she had told anyone what had happened, but her brother who answered my call was anything but nice to me. There wasn't much I could do. I assumed that I could give her a few days and then she'd listen to what I have to say. This wasn't what happened, though. When I called back, her father refused to let me talk to her. He must have known something because he was obviously livid. He referred to me as a letdown and a lowlife more than once. I hated the idea of disappointing him, so I apologized. He thanked me, but I could tell by his tone that he wasn't any happier. Time is supposed to heal all wounds. All I could do now was wait and hope Angel called me. A few weeks went by without any peep from her, and I was going crazy. All I wanted to do was hear her voice, tell her how sorry I truly was. Every day without her seemed like a lifetime, and finally I couldn't wait any longer. I drove to her house and knocked on the door, and her brother came out to meet me. Angel still didn't want to talk. I couldn't be sure if this was her choice or her family's, and my emotions were going off the rails by this point. I begged him to let me see her, and this just made him mad. Before I knew it, we were in a fistfight. I managed to get the best of him and was kicking him on the ground when his dad came out. He yelled out to me to stop, and I snapped out of my spell and realized what I was doing. As usual, I just panicked and fled in my car. Since then, I've been hiding from the police. It's been 9 days of pure hell. Everything good about my life has been ruined and there's no chance of ever getting it back. I've come to a decision. Running away from my problems is no longer an option. The quicker I deal with this, the sooner I'll be able to get back to a normal life. I'm almost positive Angel nor her family have any interest in hearing what I have to say. I'm writing this in the hope that someone she knows will share it with her. I also want others to hear my side of the story. The media can tend to twist things, and with that achieved, I'll be turning myself over to the police in the morning. I just pray the courts have mercy on me. I have no problem doing whatever it takes to show everyone I've hurt just how sorry I am. I didn't intend to harm anybody. I simply lost control of my temper. Regardless of what happens now, I just wish Angel all the happiness in the world, whether I'm a part of it or not. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/LetsReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember to tell Aunt Sue before faking your own death.